Hello team players. So in today's video, I want to talk about the second class in the BattleCry Playtest, the Guardian. Now I personally think that every class in Pathfinder 2e can be built towards support and teamwork. However, the Guardian especially lends itself to this playstyle. But I don't think the Guardian is a tank in the traditional sense. Most tanks are tanks because they're a threat. And enemies need to go after them because otherwise they're going to take a huge amount of damage. The champion does have other ways of getting enemies to attack them rather than allies. However, the Guardian takes that to a whole nother level. I believe the way that Guardians get enemies to attack them rather than allies is by being as annoying as possible, taking damage for allies, giving enemies a penalty to attack anyone else. And tripping, grappling, and shoving are all ways that the Guardian can get enemies to attack them rather than allies. The Guardian is not about doing damage. I think this is another gunslinger situation. When people first looked at the gunslinger, they thought, oh, this is a damage class. But that is not the case. The Gunslinger is built as a support class, and I think that's what the Guardian is built for. It's not a tank in the traditional sense. But you'll see that for yourself when I go through this. So while the Guardian is a strength-based class, I do think Constitution is going to be almost as important, as Guardians need a lot of hit points. They do get 10 plus their Constitution modifier in hit points every level, but most Guardians are going to need high Constitution modifier to take advantage of those hit points. The initial proficiencies for Guardian are actually pretty standard. Trained in all armor, trained in simple and martial weapons, and expert in fortitude and will saves, and trained in reflex. Pretty standard. But for skills, they are automatically trained in athletics, which is a big deal for the Guardian. In fact, some Guardians might not even want to use a shield because you do need a free hand to use athletics actions. That being said, if you can pick up a weapon that has an athletics action trait on it, then you could use a shield and use that at least. The ones that you can use for weapons are most likely going to be trip, shove, or disarm. Overall, I do have a slight problem with one of the Guardian's abilities, but where the Guardian really shines is in its feats, which I'll talk about later in this video. But now it's time to talk about abilities that you get as you level up. The first big thing is the Guardians get armor specialization at level 1, which is sooner than any other class, including champions, which is a pretty big deal. But the main thing you're going to want to be using as a Guardian is Intercept Strike, which you also get at level 1. If an ally adjacent to you would take physical damage, you can use a reaction to take that damage yourself. When you do this, you gain resistance to the damage equal to 2 plus your level, which is the same thing that the champion gives allies when they use their reaction. Keep in mind, this is all the damage. So if an attack deals more than one type of damage, you gain resistance to all of it, not just one type. Remember that this only applies to physical damage, not energy damage. But there is a feat later on that lets you use this for energy damage as well, at least most types. This is the Guardian's bread and butter. Put simply, this is how Guardians protect allies. But the best Guardians are going to be ones that have a lot of hit points, or the ones that have multiple types of resistance, mainly because of this ability. Moving on, of course, we do get Shield Block, which should be obvious, and the Taunt ability is where I have some issues. Granted, I don't think it's as bad as some people are making it out to be, but I do have some issues with it. Basically, for a single action, you can make an opponent roll a will save, and as long as they don't critically succeed, they get a +2 bonus on attacks against you, but a penalty on attacks against anyone else. While the Guardian does get armor proficiency faster than any other class, the issue is that this ability essentially makes you a fighter when it comes to armor against whoever you taunted. And while fighters can be good tanks, This ability would be better if it didn't have the +2 to hit you. However, most people that seem to have a problem with this taunt ability seem to think that the penalties do not matter, which is hardly the case. Just because you use this ability doesn't mean enemies are automatically going to target you. Smart enemies will, sure, but especially in early game, you are not running into smart enemies. What most people that are against this ability forget about is enemies like mindless undead, or animals, or oozes. Enemies that have like -4 or -5 intelligence. More than likely, they're going to go after whoever damaged them last, or who they've decided they want to eat. Again, I don't think the Guardian is meant to do damage. To reinforce this, Guardians don't get expert in weapons until level 7, and they don't get master until level 17. Another thing that reinforces this is threat technique. If enemies don't attack you, then you get a +2 to damage on your strikes against them, assuming of course they are affected by your taunt. However, what I think is better is mitigate harm. You gain resistance equal to 2 plus half your level against critical hits made by creatures affected by your taunt, and this increases as you level. Overall, I don't think taunt is meant to be used every single round. Intercept strike is, but not taunt. I think taunt is meant to be used for when an ally is really low on health, or you simply need to draw aggro away from your ally. And of course, Guardians do get the tough to kill ability, which means die hard for free, and the first time each day you would go to dying 3, you're only dying 2. Most of the rest of Guardian is pretty standard, but they do get greater armor specialization, doubles the value of your armor's potency rune when calculating your resistance from armor specialization. In addition, with the Guardian Mastery ability at level 19, you get to add your armor's full item bonus on reflex saves if you're rolling against a damaging effect. That's essentially a +6 on your reflex saves rather than your dexterity modifier, which is a big deal. Assuming, of course, that you're wearing full plate armor, which Guardians are 100% gonna want to wear medium or heavy armor, as most of your feats are gonna require that. But where I think this Guardian really shines is in its feats. Some of those are very, very good. And I'm gonna start with Bodyguard. Essentially, you choose one ally to be your charge, and when you use Intercept Strike to take damage for your charge, they gain half the resistance that you gained from using Intercept Strike for 1 round. Which honestly is pretty darn good. I mean, you're only going to be able to use Intercept Strike once per round in most situations, and this allows you to protect your allies even if you can't use it. Granted, it's not by much, but it does help. I do recommend this feat, especially if you've got a spellcaster that wants to be in melee in your party. With larger than life, you count as being one size larger for the purposes of a lot of athletics action, as long as you're wearing heavy armor. In addition, you count as that size for the purposes of enemies using those actions on you, as well as things like Swallow Whole. This is essentially the Titan Wrestler feat. However, if you're medium, you won't be able to affect gargantuan creatures. So this feat is only good if you're an ancestry that is large or can become large. Luckily, we're about to get 2 new ancestries that are large. And there are plenty of ancestors we already have who can become large. Sadly, I think this feat would be a lot better if you gave you reach with these actions. In fact, I think it'd be insane if it did. But sadly, that's not the case. It simply allows you to affect larger creatures with those actions. Next, we have Long Distance Taunt, which lets you use taunt at a 120-foot range. Which honestly, you're never going to use unless you are a ranged guardian. Which the only way that works is if you're using thrown weapons. Now this could be good with other classes when we get the Guardian archetype, but we'll have to see. Bottom line, if you want to be a thrown weapon Guardian, which I have no idea whether that would even work, then take this. Otherwise, you're better off taking something else. And of course, Guardians do get the reactive shield feat, but that's nothing new. You guys should know what that does. Shoulder check is not a great feat. If you're wearing medium or heavy armor, you can make a fist strike even if you don't have a hand free. If you're wielding a gauntlet or spike gauntlet, you can use that instead. If you hit, the target is off guard until the end of your turn. Sadly, there are quite a few problems with this. First off, they are only off guard during your turn, effectively making it so that your allies can never take advantage of this. If the Guardian had some way of moving the target so that it triggered reactions, this would be pretty good. But sadly, no. The other problem is that it's a fist strike, which means unless you have some way of doing lethal damage with non-lethal attacks, this is going to be non-lethal damage, which isn't great. And lastly, for level 1 feats, we have Unkind Shove. When you shove a target, they also receive bludgeoning damage equal to your strength modifier, which is just extra damage. Honestly, the only feat I really like at level 1 is Bodyguard. Reactive Shield can be useful, but the rest of the feats just aren't that good in my opinion. Okay, for level 2 feats, we've got Armor Break. A lot of people do like this feat for its flavor text, but honestly, I don't really rate this feat. But for 2 actions, if your armor isn't broken, and you're wearing heavy or medium armor, and you're at half your hit points or fewer, you can essentially do a power attack, but your armor becomes broken. You do ignore the speed penalty of your armor once you use this, and you do get a slightly worse version of your bulwark trait still. But even if you wanted to do damage to the Guardian, which I don't think is what the Guardian is built for, you could just take the fighter dedication and pick up power attack. Because losing your armor is pretty devastating for this class. Yeah, you end up faster, and you still have your bulwark trait, although slightly worse. But power attack you can use multiple times per combat, and this you can use once. I don't like this feat at all, plain and simple. But covering stance is honestly pretty good. When you're in this stance, you can choose one ally that's adjacent to you at the end of your turn. That ally gains lesser cover from you until the start of your next turn. However, they do lose the benefit if they move so that they're no longer adjacent to you. In addition, if you use Intercept Strike on an ally that's benefiting from this, that ally can step as a free action. Lesser cover is a +1 to their AC, which can make all the difference in the world. This is a feat that gets better and better the larger you are, which means this is another feat that is beneficial for your ancestry to be large or to become large. The larger you are, the more allies can be adjacent to you, therefore you can use your Guardian abilities and this feat on them more often. But by far, the best feat at level 2 is Hampering Sweeps. Until the beginning of your next turn, or until you move, foes within the reach of your weapon or unarmed attack cannot use move actions to move outside of your reach. They can, however, move into spaces that are within your reach. This feat would be insane on a fighter, but it is good for Guardians as well, especially if someone else in the party has Reactive Strike. What this also does is prevent enemies from melee attacking spellcasters that are far away, as if they can't move out of your reach, then they can't move up to spellcasters that are further away, or even archers. Highly recommend this feat, definitely. Raised Haft is mainly for Guardians that want to use two-handed weapons. Two-handed weapons you are wielding gain the parry traits. If the weapon already has the parry trait, then that bonus increases by 2. This is simply a way for two-handed weapon Guardians to get basically a shield, without needing an actual shield. Good if you're wanting to be a two-handed weapon Guardian, which would help your damage a lot, but otherwise, you're better off taking something else here. And lastly, for level 2 feats, we have Shielding Taunts, which just allows you to raise a shield and taunt. Not only that, but the target of your taunt takes a -1 penalty on their saving throw. This one is just great action economy if you're wearing a shield. But again, taunt is something you're not going to want to use every single round. So whether this is good or not really depends on how often you end up using taunt. At level 4, we've got Area Cover. If you're wearing medium or heavy armor, and you're in an area effect that will require a reflex saving throw, and at least one ally is adjacent to you, you can take a -2 penalty on your reflex save against that effect to give all allies adjacent to you standard cover against that effect, which effectively means you're giving them a +2 on their reflex save. At this level, this is pretty good, especially if your armor has the bulwark traits. However, where this feat gets really good is at level 19 when you get Guardian Mastery. As remember, at that level, you get your armor's item bonus on reflex save. So at that point, the -2 on your reflex save doesn't matter near as much. But I would only take this feat at this level if your armor has the bulwark traits. Otherwise, you're better off taking something else here. Averting Shield simply gives you the benefits of the Avert Gaze action whenever you raise a shield. This one is far too situational to be good. It's good if you're going up against something with a gaze attack. Otherwise, it's practically useless. I don't recommend this feat. It's just not going to come up near as much as you would like. Flying Tackle is a very fun feat. So for 2 actions, you stride, then leap, and if you end your movement adjacent to an enemy, you can trip them. And if you get a success on the trip, you get a crit success instead, which just typically means it does a little damage. In addition, you can use this with multiple different movement types if you have them, which makes for some pretty funny situations. However, unfortunately, a lot of Guardians aren't going to be able to use this. At least not effectively. The way it's worded right now, you still need a free hand to do that trip. So if you're wielding a shield and a weapon, or a 2-handed weapon, you probably aren't going to be able to use this feat. But if you can use it, it's a really fun and really good feat. We also have Intercept Energy, which lets you use Intercept Strike against every type of energy damage except for Force, Vitality, and Void damage. This is honestly a really good feat too. Now, it doesn't say this, but I think its rules as intended that you would get the resistance from Intercept Strike on this. Energy damage is near as common as physical damage, but it's still a great feat here. Intercept Foe is another pretty good feat here. Essentially, as a reaction, if an ally is being targeted by a melee strike, and you could reach that ally with a stride action, you stride, but you must end your movement adjacent to that ally. Again, you can use multiple different movement types if you have them. That ally receives a +2 bonus on their AC against the triggering attack. This is obviously for when allies are not adjacent to you, as it allows you to become adjacent to them and give them a bonus on their AC. And it's a +2 at that, which is pretty insane. Again, highly recommend this feat. Level 4 has a lot of really good feats, and Shielded Attrition is no exception. For one action, you get to raise your shield and stride up to half your speed. This triggers reactions as normal. However, whether or not an enemy chooses to use their reaction against you, they cannot use their reactions that trigger on your ally's movement until the start of your next turn. Flat out amazing feat here. Remember, you're a Guardian. That means you have really high AC. That means if enemies use their reactive strike on you, then more than likely you aren't going to be critically hit. And remember, you have resistance to certain types of damage. However, even if they don't, they can't use their reactions against your ally's movement, which is a big deal. Another fantastic feat here. Now let's talk about 6th level feats. And Disarming Intercept, which allows you to, when you intercept a strike, to disarm the target. And you don't even need a free hand for it. It does have to be used on the weapon that was used for the strike, but that's what you would want to disarm anyway, right? Also, you receive a bonus on your disarm check equal to the potency rune that is on your armor. Disarm has become actually worth it, so this is pretty darn good. I do wish Flying Tackle had the you don't need a hand free. Honestly, I think it should. After all, you're tripping them by tackling them. You shouldn't need a free hand for that. But then, of course, we have Energetic Specialization, which allows you to choose acid, cold, electricity, fire, or sonic damage. and gain resistance to that type of damage equal to 1 plus your armor's potency rune if you're wearing medium armor, or 2 plus your armor's potency rune if you're wearing heavy armor. This is just more resistance, which is fantastic. Moving on, we have mobile protection, which requires bodyguard. This essentially allows you to use intercept strike at a range of 10 feet. If you do this, then you stride up to 10 feet, but you must end your movement adjacent to the ally you're trying to protect, closer to the source of the attack than your ally, and within range or reach of the triggering attack. This means that your charge from your bodyguard feat no longer has to be adjacent to you to use intercept strike on them, which makes intercept strike quite a bit better. Sadly, this does only work on one ally, but hey, it's still pretty good. Next, we've got Reactive Strike and Reflexive Shield, both of which are feats that we have already. But I will say this. Reactive Strike works extremely well with hampering sweeps, as they either have to be very careful around you, taking steps, or if they try to move straight around you, they're going to be taking a Reactive Strike. But I do not recommend Reactive Strike for a main class Guardian. I think where Reactive Strike really shines is Fighter with the Guardian archetype, which we will get eventually. As for Reflexive Shield, well, that's just going to help you with your reflex saves, which is going to help a lot with this class. And finally, for level 6 feats, we have Stomp Ground. Basically, for 2 actions, you can make all creatures within a 5-foot emanation around you make a reflex save. On a success, the target is off guard until the end of your turn. However, on a failure or a critical failure, this is essentially a trip on all of those creatures. A trip on multiple creatures is really, really good. The more enemies you have around you, the better. And this class definitely lends itself to multiple enemies being around you within melee range, which for most enemies is going to be within the reach of this feat. Highly recommend this feat. For level 8, we've got Group Taunt, allowing you to taunt 3 enemies at once. This is actually a pretty good combo with that Stomp Ground feat I just covered. As if you taunt 3 enemies and they all decide to go after you, you can trip all of them. And it only takes 2 actions to do that. Next, we do have Mighty Bulwark, which again is a feat we already have. It used to only be available to the Sentinel archetype, but it makes sense for the Guardian to get it too, as it just gives you more from your Bulwark trait on your armor, which is a pretty big deal. Moving on, we have Quick Intercept, which is just an extra reaction. You can only use 4 Intercept Strikes. So 2 Intercept Strikes per round, or Shield Block and Intercept Strike, or another reaction in Intercept. Another feat that makes Intercept Strike better. With Repositioning Block, if you Shield Block an adjacent enemy, you can also attempt to reposition them. You don't need a free hand for this, and you receive item bonuses depending on the level of your shield. This is also really good for the Guardian, because repositioning is really good for the Guardian, as you can reposition the enemy so that they're not within reach of your allies, and need to either move or attack you. And lastly, we have Shield from Arrows. As a reaction, if an adjacent ally is targeted by a physical ranged attack, and you can see the attacker are not off guard, and your shield is raised, you can give that adjacent ally a +4 circumstance bonus to their AC against that attack. If the attack misses, you deflect it with your shield. While this is a fantastic way of protecting your allies from archers and other physical ranged attackers, it doesn't work on spells, which makes this a little situational. Granted, it's still good, but you're not going to be able to use it in every situation. Okay guys, I was going to cover level 10 feats in this video, but this video is already getting pretty long. So, high level feats will have to be my next video. But before I end this video, I do want to say this. A lot of people are comparing the Guardian to the Bard, and I do think that's a fair comparison. However, while they do similar things, I do not think that this makes the Guardian worthless if there is a Bard in the party. In fact, quite the opposite. Remember that the Guardian gives circumstance penalties to enemies, while the Bard will more than likely give status penalties to enemies, meaning those two do stack, which means the Guardian and the Bard actually work insanely well together. It also means the Guardian can protect the Bard, especially if the Bard is melee, because the Guardian wants to take hits, whereas the Bard definitely does not. So while they do perform similar roles, they can actually work together quite well. But if you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to do all that YouTube stuff. Subscribe, leave a comment, leave a like on the video, that kind of stuff. And if you guys want my videos early, you can become a member of this channel or check out my Patreon page, just like these people here. Link is in the description. If you want to learn about Commander feats, you can check out this video here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and remember, teamwork is vital. It helps us solve problems.